Hey everybody, Michael Benger from the Eastern Outdoorsman here. I've got this last venison quarter to break down, so I'm just going to let this roll and go about this for a little bit here and see how it turns out. You get a big chunk of meat like this, it can be intimidating, especially the first few times you deal with it. It looks like a lot. It looks, oh my God, how do I figure out what everything is? I don't want to screw anything up. It's not that difficult. The first thing you're going to want to do is take as much of this outside part off as possible. You got your fat, you got your different membranes, everything holding all this muscle in together. You want to get that stuff off the top. I'm actually going to flip this around here. Doesn't look as pretty on the camera, but I've got a better angle to get my knife up under here. Just want to use a real sharp, thin knife. I guess I don't need to shout because I am wearing a microphone. Forgot about that. Trying that setup out as well. You're just going to work your way up under in here. You can get this big chunks at a time, and it's actually easier to work big pieces off. You know, just kind of angle that blade up because you don't want to take off any meat or any more than is necessary. You know, even before you take this off, you can kind of start to see the lines of the different muscle groups underneath here. And as you continue to take this stuff off here, it's going to get more and more obvious. Now, there's a bunch of different ways to take these quarters apart. And there's infinite different uses for your meat. This is just the system and the process that I have found, especially over the past few years, has worked for me. As you can see, you can kind of just get your fingers in there and work some of that up. I mean, if you have the space, you could freeze these whole and roast these whole. That's one thing I've never done with a hindquarter. I've done it with the front shoulder, is roast the whole thing. But instead of a pig roast, I would like to do a deer roast sometime. I've had it. It's delicious. Whoops. See, and there's not much to that once you get it off of there. All just kind of shrinks up and you end up a little handful. Now, it wasn't really my plan this week to go out and harvest a doe. I was on my first outing of the year and was trying to go kill a big buck in the Hammersley Wild area in very remote Pennsylvania. That didn't quite work out to plan though, and I ended up back at our property, at our farm, on Sunday and Monday. So I went out hunting. I spruced up a couple of my stands and checked out some locations on Sunday. And I had to make an impromptu road trip to go pick up my bow. I almost didn't get to go hunting at all. And so I had to make a trip halfway home to meet my buddy to get my bow back from him. that took up a big part of the day, and I had to go get a new target because I wanted to make sure I was still dead on and didn't have a target with me for some reason. I think the one I had up there was shot out. So it was about 3 hours by the time I went and picked up my bow, got a target, and got back to the farm. And I shot my bow and everything was dead on. I went to take one more shot and I looked down at my bow, and the bowstring was, the serving was frayed where the arrow knocks onto the string inside my string loop and came undone. So my arrow wouldn't hold on the string. So it took another hour or two to find some material around the house that I could tie around that string that would hold my arrow but not interfere with my shot and interfere with my nock. So by the time this doe decided she just wanted to hang around 20 yards for me for about 10 minutes the next morning, I decided that it's probably time to start putting meat in the freezer. Went through a lot of effort just to get out there, so it's nice to come home with something. Now, I pretty much have all that the main parts of the membranes and stuff off of here. And see, that part's not too difficult. All right. Now, I'm always trying to make this a little easier on myself. So while everything's together here, if you take your knife, you can see this back part, you split the pelvic bone. So this flat section here, you just run your knife down a little bit, just along the edge of that bone. And then follow it around, just reach in and feel where it is. Just cut down around that edge, and just follow that edge right down in there. Might even be able to pop loosen that ball joint up a little bit in there. Oops, another knife go. All right, I'm gonna take this bit of fat off the bend here and get a real hard knuckle of tissue and stuff in there that kind of holds a lot of pieces together. See, I'm just really skimming with my knife. Just running it right underneath there. Oopsie. Do that to your knife. All right, so right here is where we worked our knife to on the other side. Worked it all the way around this bone. So now I'm just going to bring that right around the corner here. Just a little bit. Just cut in there. Cut in there. Don't want to go too deep here, but you're just getting things kind of started. Just run down the edge of that bone. I know I'm cutting towards myself and I shouldn't be, but I've done it once or twice. All right, so now I've freed myself kind of the whole way around this main hip bone here. Try and tilt this. So I said those lines on the muscle sections will become really apparent once you got those outer membranes off. So you can see that here. I'm gonna spin this back around this way. So I got my angle. And what I'm gonna do now, it's gonna start with my fingers and just work my way down through those separations. Because you'll see there's membranes all over each of those muscle groups, and they just kind of pull right out for you. Now I'll get my knife. I'll just start to free those up a little bit. Once my fingers don't work, oops, guess I can't lean in there like that. If you want to see anything. All right, so here it thins out. Things start to come together a little bit. Probably can't see from that angle, but got a little line there. You can trim that up, throw that right in the grill, then slice that thin after you get all this stuff off of here. And I always mix up which is my top round and which is my bottom round. I believe this is the top round here. But see, that frees up real easy, and that's the biggest piece. And if you do that cut work like we did up here, stuff's kind of loose from the top already. And when you get down to the bottom on this piece, it gets real thin towards this end and wraps around towards the top of the shank. And so we're just going to cut right along here, just real shallowly, and that'll free this right up. A little tendon there. So you don't want to go too deep. You don't want to get the piece underneath. And then there's no hurry. My only hurry here is my camera battery. And I don't have kids at home at the moment. Okay. So this big round is connected to this lighter colored piece here, which is your eye round, which I really like grilling those whole. Get that out here in a minute. Just follow those muscles all the way down to the end. Just gonna poke my knife through there. What do we got left connecting this here? Whoops. Just hook to the bone here. Get this little nub up on the hip bone. And there. Like I said, I always forget if that's the top round or the bottom round, but you got your eye around and this, and you can leave that together if you want. I've smoked this whole before and then sliced it really thin on a slicer for sandwiches or just as itself. But I like to maximize my meals and options, so I separate that round out of there. You just cut these membranes. kind of hold it up, let gravity do its thing. There. So you got those. Now, let's clean some of this up. Next, I'm going to work my fingers in here again. Go back and trim along the bone. Just cutting along the hip bone. Feel the bone out there. Okay, go right along the bone here. Oopsie, I missed the bone. Where am I at? Okay. I got our line at the end of the muscle here. Okay, you got a couple different, you got your second biggest roast in here. This little top piece, this little cap of muscle, I usually pull that off, put that in the grind pile. Just kind of holds these two together. You know, these roasts, generally I'll cook them, nowadays I cook them all pretty similarly. You know, I'm cooking them whole, generally on the grill or in a cast iron pan. The bigger ones I will sear in the cast iron pan, then finish in the oven. Here's your other round roast. That's a beautiful piece of meat. So you can prepare that on the grill. You can prepare that in a crock pot. You could cut steaks out of this, like individual steaks, and cook them that way. I find it's better to cook it whole and then cut your pieces off. It just helps the meat retain its moisture and flavor and doesn't dry out as much. And you've got less danger of overcooking it if you're cooking it in a whole section. The other thing that you can do with this that I've done over the past few years is make corned venison. You just brine this for I have to look at my recipe. I think it's about 10 days. Week, 10 days, something like that. You make your brine, and just excellent, excellent corned venison out of that cut. These I like to put in the crock pot, or I might trim that out, flatten that out a little bit, throw that in the grill, and then slice that thin. Been making a lot of tacos and burritos lately. Now here you're left with kind of this football roast on top. That's definitely a slow cooker type piece. And then you have your shank. That's a slow cook piece. I spent a lot of time over the years boning these shanks out and putting it in the grind pile and cutting all these tendons out so you don't mess up your grinder. But from what I've learned over the past couple of years about cooking wild game and different cuts and just upping my cooking game, I've been keeping these shanks whole and slow cooking them. I've not made any true osso buco. I don't have a saw that I don't think is good enough to chop these into those hunks, so I haven't gone that far in my cooking game yet. But I do like slow cooking these shanks whole. I just throw them in the crock pot generally, and you get really tender meat you can pull out and use for a variety of reasons. This last piece, this football roast here, that one is attached, kind of wrapped around this femur bone. To get that off, what you're going to do is basically just skim around the bone with your knife and peel it off from the inside out. These aprons put on about 15-20 pounds, by the way. I noticed that yesterday when I was shooting some stuff. Yeah, should have taken this hip bone out of here first. Once you get this ball joint freed up, you just use your knife. Cut your way around there. Get it out of your way. This does get to be kind of cumbersome. There we go. All these bones are going to go into a big stock pot and be a big batch of bone broth that I'll then pressure can and use throughout the year. We'll get into that later today. So now this is a little easier to work with. And you can just kind of cut down here around the knee, because this end is really tough where everything comes together. And you're okay leaving some of this meat on the bone, especially if you're making bone broth. So there, you got that football roast, and then you've got another small, nice, tender roast here. Roast or steak, that's another nice marinate and throw on the grill and slice that up piece once we get that trimmed up. That's basically it. You're going to take this bone off of here the same way you took the other end off, and I'm going to cut this off here. Oops, got a little piece of bone down there yet. So I'm going to trim that off there nice and neat. And this piece here I'm actually going to put in my hamburger pile. But the rest of the shank, the rest of it I'm going to keep whole. Just because it's easier to freeze that way, and it's the way these pieces take up space in my freezers. So there. That has a lot of connective tissue in there. Might as well finish the job here for y'all. Come around the top of the knee. See that frees up in there. She's going to need an orthopedic surgeon after this. Be careful you don't wedge your knife in there. I guess it would help if I cut that part. It'll be a little slippery at this point. There is something in there that I missed. We did good the whole way on this till the end. Now we look like a rank amateur. There we go. So I'll go in my bone broth. That'll go in the freezer. So there we got our shank. Football roast there. Got a nice little tender piece there. That's going to go in the grind pile. We got beautiful piece there. Beautiful piece there. Got our other smaller roast there. Along with our eye around. And some bonus goodness there. Then we got our bones for the bone broth. Another little piece of the grind pile. That's it. There's your hindquarter broken down. That's what I got for today.